Most people don't realize their childhood is still sitting quietly inside their relationships, influencing who they chase, who they trust, and why love sometimes feels more painful than safe. And one of the deepest examples of that is what people casually call daddy issues. The internet turned that phrase into a joke a long time ago, a meme, something people throw around without really thinking about what it means. But behind that phrase is something much more serious, because the way someone experiences love, protection, validation, criticism, or emotional absence from a father figure can quietly shape the way they experience relationships for years afterward. And the scary part is, most people don't even notice the pattern while they're living inside it. Sometimes it looks like constantly chasing emotionally unavailable people. Sometimes it looks like overthinking every text message. Sometimes it looks like feeling terrified of abandonment, even in relationships that seem stable on the outside. And sometimes it looks like pushing away healthy love because chaos feels more emotionally familiar than peace. That's why this conversation matters. Not to shame people, not to label anyone, and definitely not to mock emotional wounds people didn't choose, but to understand how emotional patterns quietly follow people into adulthood, especially into relationships. Because once you finally understand the pattern, you stop blaming yourself for every failed connection and start seeing what your nervous system has been trying to recreate all along. A lot of people grow up believing love has to be earned, not naturally received, earned through performance, through proving yourself, through staying useful, through being good enough. And when a child grows up with a father figure who is emotionally absent, inconsistent, overly critical, unpredictable, or difficult to emotionally connect with, something subtle starts happening psychologically. The child's brain slowly starts building an emotional blueprint for what love feels like, and that blueprint often becomes anxiety, uncertainty, emotional chasing, or fear of abandonment. Because children naturally internalize emotional environments. If affection feels inconsistent, the nervous system adapts to inconsistency. If validation feels conditional, love starts feeling tied to performance. If emotional connection feels distant, distance starts feeling normal. And later in life, many people unknowingly recreate those same emotional dynamics in their relationships because familiar pain often feels safer than unfamiliar peace. That's one of the darkest parts of unresolved emotional wounds. People don't always chase what's healthy. They often chase what feels emotionally familiar. And honestly, a lot of viewers probably know exactly what that feels like. You meet someone emotionally distant, unavailable, confusing, or inconsistent, and instead of walking away, you become more emotionally invested. You tell yourself, if I can just make this work, maybe things will finally feel secure. But security never fully comes, and that emotional uncertainty slowly becomes addictive. That's why some people become obsessed with winning over cold partners. Every small amount of affection feels incredibly rewarding because emotionally unavailable love activates the same emotional uncertainty they experienced growing up. And without realizing it, relationships slowly become emotional survival missions instead of emotional partnerships. You start overanalyzing messages, waiting anxiously for replies, checking tone changes, reading into silence, trying to avoid doing anything that could make the other person pull away. And what's painful is, people experiencing this often look calm on the outside, but internally, their nervous system is constantly bracing for rejection. That's why even small moments can feel emotionally huge. A delayed text, a colder tone, less affection one day, a canceled plan. To someone with deep abandonment anxiety, those things don't just feel inconvenient, they feel threatening. And this is where relationships quietly become exhausting, because instead of feeling emotionally safe, you feel emotionally alert all the time. You become hyper-aware of mood changes. You rehearse conversations in your head. You try to avoid saying the wrong thing. You constantly monitor whether the relationship still feels okay. That level of emotional tension drains people slowly, and many people living this way don't even realize how anxious they've become until they finally experience a relationship where they don't have to constantly earn reassurance, a relationship where affection feels consistent, where communication feels calm, where love doesn't disappear every time conflict happens. And honestly, that kind of emotional stability can feel uncomfortable at first to someone whose nervous system adapted to chaos. That realization changes a lot, because suddenly people begin understanding why they lose interest when relationships finally become calm, why peace feels emotionally empty, why healthy partners sometimes feel too nice, why emotional stability can accidentally trigger discomfort. And without understanding the psychology underneath it, people sometimes sabotage the very relationships they've always wanted. They create unnecessary conflict, pull away emotionally, lose attraction when things become stable, or suddenly feel trapped when love becomes secure. Not because they want pain, but because their nervous system learned to associate love with emotional tension. That's why healing isn't just about finding better people. It's about retraining emotional patterns. It's about learning the difference between real love and emotional chasing, because they are not the same thing. Real love does not constantly leave you emotionally confused. Real love does not require endless performance to feel accepted. Real love does not make you terrified every day that someone will suddenly stop caring. And this is important because a lot of people normalize emotional suffering in relationships without realizing how deeply it affects them psychologically, especially when they learned early in life that emotional needs should stay hidden. A lot of people with unresolved father wounds become extremely independent emotionally. They struggle asking for help, struggle expressing vulnerability, struggle trusting people completely, because dependence feels dangerous. So instead of openly needing people, they silently carry everything alone. And eventually, emotional suppression transforms into emotional exhaustion. This is why some people look strong while secretly feeling emotionally disconnected from themselves. They become high-functioning, emotionally numb, still going to work, still replying to messages, still showing up socially, but internally they feel disconnected, tired, and emotionally unseen. And honestly, some viewers watching this may have spent years blaming themselves for relationship patterns that actually began much earlier in life, not because they're broken, but because emotional conditioning is powerful. The good news is, awareness changes things. The moment you recognize your patterns, you stop operating completely on autopilot. You start noticing why certain people attract you, why certain behaviors trigger you, why emotional distance feels addictive, and why peace sometimes feels uncomfortable. And that awareness becomes the beginning of emotional freedom. Because healing doesn't mean becoming perfect. It means learning how to choose relationships that feel emotionally safe instead of emotionally familiar. It means learning that love should not constantly feel like proving your worth. It means realizing you don't have to earn basic emotional care. And maybe most importantly, it means understanding your emotional needs are not weaknesses. They matter too. That's why true healing usually begins when someone finally slows down long enough to ask themselves a difficult question. Am I choosing relationships based on genuine connection or based on emotional patterns I learned years ago? That question changes a lot, because sometimes the relationship problem isn't just about the other person. Sometimes it's about the emotional blueprint silently running underneath everything. And once people begin understanding that blueprint, they finally stop confusing chaos with chemistry. They stop chasing unavailable people, hoping to finally feel chosen. They stop sacrificing themselves trying to earn love. They stop recreating emotional pain that feels familiar. And little by little, relationships start becoming safer instead of emotionally exhausting. Not perfect, not conflict-free, but emotionally healthier. More honest, more secure, more peaceful. And honestly, that kind of love often feels quieter than chaos, but much safer for the soul. So now, I'm curious, do you think childhood emotional experiences shape the way people love as adults? And what relationship pattern do you think people ignore the most? I'd genuinely love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if this video connected with something you've quietly experienced for a long time, make sure you subscribe for more conversations about relationships, psychology, emotional intelligence, and emotional healing.